Enid Maud Lindeman was the kind of woman who seemed more myth than reality, a widow 4 times over, with each husband leaving not just an inheritance, but a trail of dark whispers in their wake. Her life spanned continents and scandals, from the glittering parties of Paris to the war-torn streets of France, where she survived the Nazi occupation by milking goats and smuggling escaped prisoners in her elegant villa. Nicknamed Lady Killmore by Somerset Maugham, her infamy was as potent as her allure. She dined with princes, kept pet cheetahs on diamond-studded leashes, and never let a scandal go to waste. Yet beneath the extravagant furs and cutting wit was a woman who battled addiction, heartbreak, and society's unrelenting gaze. Enid's story isn't just one of luxury and seduction. It's a tale of survival, of a woman who rose from the ashes of rumor and ruin to live boldly on her own terms. This is the untamed life of Enid Maud Lindeman, a scandalous legend who defied the odds, the headlines, and perhaps even death itself. If you enjoy stories like this, please consider subscribing. We have over 50 women's biographies on the channel, and your support really matters. Now let's get into the scandalous life of Enid Lindeman. Enid Maud Lindeman was born in 1892, the sun-soaked land of Australia her cradle, her lineage rich with history and ambition. She was the great-granddaughter of Dr. Henry Lindeman, a pioneering English émigré whose dreams took root not in medicine, but in the fertile soil of a vineyard. In 1843, Henry applied for a crown grant of land, naming it Cairo. From this rugged stretch outside Sydney, he founded Lindeman Wines, planting the seeds of what would bloom into Australia's renowned wine industry. His name became a toast in the world of vintners, and his legacy set the stage for a life of extraordinary chapters for Enid, who in time would write her own. Raised in Strathfield alongside 6 siblings, Enid's childhood was one of adventure and audacity. Where other girls might have contented themselves with dolls, Enid reveled in the outdoors, following her brothers into the wilderness, gun in hand or fishing rod poised. She rode horses with a fearless grace, a foreshadowing of the life she would lead, bold, unapologetic, and untethered to the expectations of society. At just 19, her path intersected with that of Roderick Cameron, a 43-year-old shipping magnate from New York, whose empire spanned the Pacific, reaching from the shores of America to the coastlines of Australia. A lifelong bachelor and a man of commanding presence, Cameron was immediately captivated by the beauty and vivacity of the young Australian. She, in turn, was drawn into the current of his world, a whirlwind of wealth and power that would soon define her own. His proposal came swiftly, but her mother, ever cautious, hesitated. "Too young to know your heart," she warned, urging patience. Yet time would prove her hesitation was less about wisdom and more about a confession that would come years later. Enid's mother had fallen in love with Cameron herself. Despite this delicate revelation, the pull of fate was stronger than the reservations of propriety. When Enid turned 21, Cameron stood waiting, and they were wed in a grand ceremony at St. Paul's Anglican Church, surrounded by 230 guests, each witness to the birth of a new chapter in Enid's life. Their home became a vast estate on Staten Island, 200 acres of American soil where she would preside over gardens and grand gatherings. Cameron also owned the Cameron Building, a towering 16-story skyscraper that marked the Manhattan skyline like a beacon of his success, rising at the corner of 34th and Madison. Stories of Enid's beauty spread like wildfire. It was said that traffic in Manhattan would come to a halt when she stepped out, a vision so radiant that men and women alike stopped to marvel at her. This vision of perfection, they called her. But was it truth or another of Enid's playful inventions? Friends, accustomed to her flair for embellishment, would call her a mythomaniac, a storyteller whose tales, like the wine of her ancestors, grew richer with time. But life, with all its splendor, carries shadows. Barely a year into their marriage, Enid was widowed. Cameron, the titan of industry, succumbed to cancer, leaving behind a grieving wife, a 9-month-old son named Rory, and a fortune that would ensure her life of privilege, though no wealth could ever replace the man she had come to love. However, death would continue to follow Enid, till years later she was accused of being involved. At just 22, Enid Maud Lindeman was already a wealthy widow, left to raise her young son amidst a whirlwind of riches and rumors. but grief didn't slow her down. Soon after her husband's death, she became entangled with Bernard Baruch, the American financier destined to advise presidents like Woodrow Wilson and Franklin Roosevelt. 20 years her senior, Baruch wasn't just her financial guide. Whispers swirled that he had been her lover long before her marriage to Cameron, perhaps when she was as young as 16. It was a scandal in the making, the kind that trailed Enid throughout her life. Her sister-in-law, with a mixture of outrage and relief, once quipped, "Can you imagine that when my brother died, her first lover was that dreadful Bernard Baruch? Thank God she had enough sense not to marry him." Marriage, of course, was never on the table. Baruch was already wed. And in Enid's own words, he wasn't very good in bed, and he was very mean. By 1915, the drums of war echoed across Europe, and Enid, never one to shrink from adventure, moved to Paris to drive ambulances for the war effort. It was there that she became involved with the Earl of Derby, soon to be Britain's ambassador to France. The Earl, already burdened with his duties as Minister of War, despaired at the chaos she caused among his officers. One young man threatened to take his own life if he couldn't have her, he confided to her, as though this kind of turmoil was routine in her affairs. And for Enid it was. Over the course of her many romantic entanglements, 5 of her lovers would eventually take their own lives, unable to bear the weight of her rejection. Such was her power over men that the wife of one admirer demanded to know where Enid intended to be buried, because her husband had declared that if he couldn't be next to Enid in life, he would settle for eternity beside her in death. The woman added dryly, "And I don't intend to keep digging him up." Sensing the need for a distraction, the Earl introduced her to a war hero, his friend's son, Frederick Cavendish, affectionately called Caviar. Distinguished on the battlefield, known for his dashing looks and unparalleled polo skills, Caviar had none of the fortune or titles Enid was typically drawn to. But she needed a man to manage her finances, something she was notoriously poor at, and in July 1917, they married. It was an unexpected union, born not of passion or wealth, but of practicality. Enid was used to wealth, yet here she was, married to a man with little more than his courage and charm to offer. After the wedding, Caviar returned to the Belgian front, while Enid continued to drive ambulances. Their post-war life took them to Cairo, where Caviar commanded the 9th Lancers. Egypt, with its golden deserts and ancient mystique, captured Enid's heart. By day, she held court among her husband's comrades, and by night, she became legend. There was the dare, of course, the one that saw her bedding the entire regiment, a tale confirmed by both Enid and several of the men involved. And then there were the nights. She dressed as a man, playing piano in the officers' mess, blurring the lines between propriety and scandal with her usual ease. Egypt, with its picnics by the Nile, moonlit rides through the Sahara, and lavish soirees in sandstone villas, was a paradise. It was, as Enid would later call it, the happiest time of her life. A time when she wasn't just a widow or a wife, but a woman who lived entirely on her own terms, amid the heat and sand of a country as intoxicating as she was. In the shimmering heat of Egypt, amidst the ancient ruins and golden sands, Enid Maud Lindeman's life took another unexpected turn. It was there, in the shadow of the pyramids, that she met Lord Carnarvon, custodian of Highclere Castle. Carnarvon had married well to stave off financial ruin, but his true passion lay in Egyptology. Enid, ever drawn to men with power and prestige, found herself entangled in an affair with the man whose name would soon echo through history. When King Tut's tomb was uncovered in 1922, Lord Carnarvon, who had funded the expedition, ensured that Enid was among the first to step into the burial chamber. With her young son Rory by her side, she walked through halls untouched by time, the weight of history pressing down upon them, while the world watched from afar in awe and wonder. But for Enid, the tomb wasn't just a historical marvel. It was a stage upon which her life of intrigue and adventure would continue to unfold. After 6 years in Egypt, basking in its mysteries, she and her husband, Caviar, left for England. There, Caviar was appointed Brigadier General, commanding the 1st Cavalry Brigade in Hampshire, and they settled into the quiet rhythm of country life. But quiet had never suited Enid. Even as she gave birth to her daughter Patricia in 1925 and a son, Frederick Carroll, 15 months later, a restless energy simmered beneath the surface. She learned to drive a sleek black Buick, an uncommon skill for women of her time, and embraced the speed and freedom that came with it. Her striking appearance only grew more distinctive as her famous red hair, bleached white by a bout of pneumonia, framed her face like a crown of ice against the sharp lines of her Chanel suits. Yet despite the bucolic setting of their army-owned property, her heart wandered. Trips to the continent, golf with the Prince of Wales and his glittering set. Her life was one of perpetual movement. The wildness of Egypt gave way to the allure of London, Paris, and the fashionable enclaves of the south of France, where she could once again play the role of seductress, myth, and enigma. Caviar, ever the dutiful soldier, remained in the countryside with his beloved polo ponies, content with everything life had given him, except her love. Then in 1931, the inevitable struck once more. Caviar died suddenly from a cerebral hemorrhage in Enid's Paris flat. She was a widow once again, though perhaps for Enid it was more a return to the freedom she craved than the loss of a companion. Their marriage had been one of good company and convenience rather than passion, and with his death, she was free to pursue life on her own terms once more. Widowhood never slowed her. In fact, it seemed to embolden her. She rekindled an old romance with Viscount Castleross, London's notorious gossip columnist and heir to the earldom of Kenmare. Castleross was charming and ambitious, but he had little money, a fatal flaw in Enid's eyes. While he dreamed of marrying her, Enid's attentions shifted to another, Viscount Marmaduke Furness, known simply as Duke. Furness, a shipping magnate and the sixth richest man in the world, had everything that Castleross lacked: wealth, status, and power. With Duke, Enid found herself at the heart of society's glittering circle once more, a woman whose allure lay not just in her beauty, but in the enigma she had carefully crafted over a lifetime. Yet even as she stood beside one of the richest men in the world, the shadow of her past lingered, the whisper that wherever Enid went, death followed. And with each new chapter in her life, the rumors only grew louder. Duke had his own dark past. He had been married twice before, and rumors clung to the mysterious death of his first wife, Daisy. She had died under suspicious circumstances during a pleasure cruise near Monte Carlo, where he promptly buried her at sea, sparking rumors that Duke had played a role in her demise. His second wife, Thelma Morgan, was now the mistress of the Prince of Wales and close confidant to Wallis Simpson, whose own affair would eventually lead to the abdication crisis. If you want to dive deeper into the life of Thelma and her connection to both Duke and the Prince of Wales, there's a detailed video on her life available on the channel. Duke, however, was utterly captivated by Enid from the moment their paths crossed. He claimed his heart stopped the day he met her, and his pursuit was relentless. Flowers, jewelry, extravagant gestures, he showered her with them daily. He offered her the use of his cars, yachts, and private planes, making it impossible for her to ignore him. When he learned she had booked a ticket on the Golden Arrow from London, he promptly canceled it, sending his private plane to fetch her instead. Upon returning to her Chelsea flat, Enid found a letter waiting for her, informing her that Duke had bought not only her flat, but the entire building. Enid relished the chase, once remarking, "A man is a predator. He enjoys the uncertainty of the chase, so never let him feel sure of his prey." But after the grand gesture of buying her building, she felt compelled to accept his dinner invitation at the Savoy. And from that night, their affair began. They married in 1933, and Enid's life grew more luxurious than she could have ever imagined. Duke owned a private railroad, 2 yachts, a private airplane, and they traveled in a convoy of Rolls-Royce cars. They toured South Africa in grand style, the world seemingly at their feet. But beneath the surface, their relationship simmered with tension. Duke's temper was uncontrollable, his passive aggression towards Enid an ever-present undercurrent. Yet in her mind, these outbursts were merely signs of his overwhelming love. "There was nothing in this world he was not prepared to give me," she later reflected. "Of all the men that loved me, and some were as rich as him, he was the one who was prepared to lay the world at my feet." However, his affection did not extend to her children. When her daughter Patricia called him daddy, Duke snapped, "I am not your father, and never refer to me as such." He despised their presence, relegating them to a separate wing in his London mansion, or placing them in a different flat altogether. Despite having 3 children of his own, Duke's relationship with his family was fractured. His eldest son, Dick, he disliked. His favorite child, Averell, broke his heart by marrying a man he disapproved of, and when she died of pneumonia, the two had never reconciled. His third son, Tony, was born during his marriage to Thelma, but Duke refused to acknowledge him, convinced Tony was the Prince of Wales's child, referring to him cruelly as the bastard. Throughout their marriage, Enid continued to live as she always had, on her own terms. She began collecting exotic animals, including a pet cheetah that wore a diamond-studded collar, which she proudly walked through Hyde Park. She had a Heiress, which she trained to use the toilet, and a parrot that mimicked her voice, calling out "phone pat" whenever the phone rang. But even her eccentricities couldn't shield her from Duke's growing jealousy. He loathed anything or anyone that took her attention away from him. Despite their wealth and lavish lifestyle, Enid took an interest in helping those less fortunate. She frequently stopped to offer money or aid to homeless veterans, much to the disdain of her chauffeur and nanny, whom she considered tremendous snobs. During these charitable excursions, she often brought her children along, teaching them the value of compassion in a world driven by privilege. To protect her fortune from Duke's growing resentment, Enid eventually signed it over to her eldest son, Rory. "He didn't need my money," she said, "and he resented my financial independence, so I surrendered myself to him, ensuring my son would be taken care of." Yet despite the financial tension between them, Enid remained devoted to her children, always described by friends and family as a loving mother. Enid was equally known for her extravagant habits. She hid her valuable jewelry in Kleenex boxes, convinced it was the last place burglars would look. She gambled without restraint at casinos in Monte Carlo, often dressing in a manner that left fellow gamblers in awe. At one particular game, Aga Khan jokingly remarked, "Enid, my dear, perhaps next time you could wear a simple black dress and not throw us off our game," after she appeared in a figure-hugging white gown, adorned with a tiara and a diamond necklace. Her flair for making an entrance was legendary. When she attended the wedding of Prince Rainier and Grace Kelly, onlookers mistook her for foreign royalty, applauding as she exited the cathedral. As the 1930s came to an end, the tension between Enid and Duke grew unbearable. No longer discreet about her extramarital affairs, Enid brazenly flaunted them. One lover in particular, the Duke of Westminster, incited Duke's wrath. As one of the few men whose wealth rivaled his own, the Duke of Westminster was a threat, and Duke flew into jealous rages whenever he learned of Enid's interactions with him. Their turbulent relationship culminated when Duke refused to accompany Enid to the coronation of King George VI in 1937. Undeterred, Enid attended with the Duke of Westminster instead. Furious, Duke declared their marriage over and left for the continent, prompting Enid to take her children and escape to America. Upon her return, she penned a dramatic letter to Duke, claiming she would take her own life in a taxi. In a panic, Duke organized a search party, only to discover that Enid had been at a London clinic undergoing a facelift. Enraged, Duke announced that his second wife, Thelma, had returned to him and threw Enid and her children out of the house. Though Enid left, their separation was short-lived. Days before Britain declared war on Germany, Duke cabled her, asking for forgiveness. Ever the pragmatist, Enid forgave him, and they reunited in France, unperturbed by the looming conflict. During the early days of World War II, Duke's health deteriorated rapidly. Bedridden, he was diagnosed with cirrhosis of the liver, and despite the looming threat of war, Enid remained by his side, caring for him in their Cannes home. With the war intensifying, many of their servants fled, leaving Enid to manage the household and care for Duke on her own. Duke's condition worsened, plagued by hallucinations in which he would shout at the ghost of his deceased daughter, Averil, blaming her for marrying a man he had disapproved of. His decline was swift, and on October 5, 1940, Duke passed away, leaving Enid in a precarious situation, alone in Nazi-occupied France. To survive, Enid pawned her jewelry and bought goats to produce milk, butter, and cheese for her family. Her resourcefulness didn't stop there. Living near a prisoner of war camp, Enid frequently took in escaped prisoners, hiding them in her home. In one daring moment, she disguised an escapee as her maid, successfully deceiving the military police during a raid. However, as Nazi suspicion increased, Enid knew it was only a matter of time before they were caught. She made the difficult decision to flee, using her connections with the British government to secure passage out of France. Traveling under her American passport from her first marriage, Enid and her daughter Patricia escaped to Spain and then Lisbon, where they boarded an airship bound for London. Back in London, now in the midst of the Blitz, Enid and Patricia took refuge at Claridge's Hotel, while Enid waited for her inheritance from Duke's estate. But the path to her fortune was far from smooth. Duke's second wife, Thelma, contested the will, sparking a lengthy legal battle. Duke had altered his will shortly before his death, leaving Enid £3.5 million, multiple properties, and his yacht. Thelma argued that her son, Duke's youngest, was entitled to the inheritance, particularly after Duke's eldest son, Dick, had died during the war. As the case dragged on, Enid found solace in an old flame, Lord Castleross, now the Earl of Kenmare. The two had rekindled their romance, and Castleross, now divorced and fallen on hard times, moved in with Enid at the London home she had once shared with Duke. Castleross, severely overweight and in declining health, struggled with the stairs and spent much of his time battling his jealousy over Enid's past. Despite this, he was kind to her children, a far cry from Duke's cold indifference. Enid, ever resourceful, took up a job in a munitions factory during the war. But even in this, she found a way to bend the rules. Unwilling to rise early, she had the welding equipment sent to her home and worked from the comfort of her bed, wearing her nightgown and goggles. She and Patricia made a game of the war, standing on the balcony during air raids, counting the German bombers as they flew overhead, wagering money on who could count the most. Unbeknownst to Enid, Castleross had been corresponding with his ex-wife, Doris Delevingne, who was in America. Desperate to return to London, Doris convinced Castleross to promise to remarry her upon her return. With help from Winston Churchill, Doris managed to secure passage back to England. But when Castleross saw her after years apart, he was shocked by how much she had aged and retracted his promise. A few weeks later, Doris took her own life. With Doris gone, Castleross focused his attention on marrying Enid, assuming she was wealthy from Duke's estate. He offered to transfer £3,000 into her bank account and sign over his family estate Killarney if she agreed to marry him. Although she accepted, she asked him to wait until her legal battle with Thelma was resolved, fearing that a marriage might jeopardize her claim to Duke's fortune. Castleross, impatient, publicly announced their engagement, leaving her little choice but to marry him in January 1943. Following their marriage, they moved to Killarney, but the union quickly soured. Castleross's health declined and his jealousy turned violent. When Enid told him she was pregnant, he grew suspicious that the child wasn't his, accusing her of infidelity in a series of violent outbursts. During one argument, he hurled a chair at her, calling her a whore. Enid, unfazed, famously retorted, "I might be a whore, but it seems to me I'm the one paying for your services." Just 8 months into their marriage, Castleross died of a heart attack, his excessive weight and lifestyle finally catching up with him. Despite warnings from doctors to avoid sex due to his fragile condition, Enid later remarked, "It was one of his only pleasures left in life. How could I deny him?" After his death, rumors about Enid's pregnancy swirled. Castleross's mother, the Dowager Lady Kenmare, accused Enid of fabricating the pregnancy in order to hold on to the Kenmare estate until her dispute over Duke's will was settled. Enid claimed the child would have been a boy, but under pressure from the Dowager, she agreed to an abortion, stating that Lady Kenmare had insisted, believing that any child born to a woman of Enid's age would be an idiot. As the 1950s began, the long legal battle over Duke's estate came to an end, and Enid finally received her inheritance. Enid Maud Lindeman never married again after Castleross's death. Instead, she found solace in the beauty of her villa in the south of France, a sanctuary now under the care of her eldest son, Rory. Rory, a decorated war hero, took over the estate, transforming it into a glamorous refuge where the world's most famous film stars, artists, and bohemians would gather beneath the sun-drenched skies. The villa, filled with the echoes of laughter, the scent of Mediterranean pine, and the hum of jazz-filled evenings, became the embodiment of the Lindeman spirit. Bold, unapologetic, and free. As Rory entertained the elite, Enid devoted herself to her passions: painting, sculpting, and her ever-growing menagerie of beloved animals. Her spirit remained untamed, her zest for life undiminished. Lovers came and went, as did her travels across Europe, darting between her many cottages, each one a hideaway filled with art, eccentric decor, and stories whispered among society's boldest. But the shadows of her past trailed her like a dark veil. The nickname Lady Killmore clung to her, a crude moniker bestowed by Somerset Maugham, reflecting the cruel rumor that she had played a hand in the deaths of her 4 husbands. She laughed it off publicly, but in quieter moments, she confessed that the whispers sometimes stung. In 1954, however, Enid found herself at the center of a very real scandal. She was in New York, staying at the Sherry Netherland Hotel, visiting her sister-in-law, when she crossed paths with Donald Bloomingdale, the scion of the famed department store. Though it was not unusual for her to be in the city or for Bloomingdale, a friend of Rory's, to attend one of her soirees, this visit would be anything but ordinary. Her sister-in-law, with her usual sharp tongue, scoffed at Bloomingdale's presence, dismissing him as a peddler of pots and pans. As the evening drew to a close, Enid retired to her suite, while Bloomingdale, who also kept a room at the hotel, lingered. Rumor had it that later that night, Bloomingdale asked Enid for heroin, and she obliged, delivering the fatal dose wrapped in a lace handkerchief embroidered with her initials. The next morning, his lifeless body was discovered by his servant, who promptly alerted the lawyer. Before the news could spread, Enid had vanished, fleeing New York, before anyone could connect her to Bloomingdale's untimely death. For a time, Enid avoided New York, her once familiar playground now tinged with scandal. Daisy Fellows, a former friend turned fierce critic, couldn't resist making a mockery of the incident. "I shall host a dinner for 12, 6 men and 6 women," she quipped, "and Enid shall have the place of honor, for she's killed the most people." Daisy's words cut deeper than others, for she had never accepted Enid as an equal. An Australian with a vague pedigree, she once called her. When Enid once began a conversation with people of our class, Daisy interrupted sharply. "Just a minute, Enid. Your class or mine?" Despite Enid's tough exterior, there were moments when the rumors hurt her. At a Manhattan dinner party, when a persistent host pressed her about her Lady Killmore reputation, she simply rose from the table and left. The host, anticipating her reaction, had preemptively sent her chauffeur home. Unperturbed, Enid walked to the nearest highway and hitched a ride back to her hotel, an audacious act of defiance that only added to her legend. The Bloomingdale scandal inevitably resurfaced Enid's past struggles with addiction. Murmurs spread that she too was a heroin addict. In truth, Enid had briefly been addicted to morphine in the 1930s, after an injury left her in excruciating pain. She sought rehabilitation and managed to recover, rarely touching anything stronger than Coca-Cola in the years that followed. But Daisy Fellows wasn't one to let facts stand in the way of a good joke. If Enid was absent or late to a party, Daisy would sneer, probably busy with her needle. As the years passed, Enid found new peace in Kenya, living with her daughter Patricia and an array of animals, or at her villa in France with Rory. Her youngest son, Frederick, now the 7th Baron Waterpark, also welcomed her at his estate. At 70, she remained as indomitable as ever, acquiring land in South Africa to breed racehorses. Yet, as an old back injury began to flare up, she was forced to relinquish her dreams of the racetrack. With her strength waning, she signed the land over to Patricia, who transformed it into a sanctuary for abused and endangered animals, a fitting tribute to her mother's enduring love of all creatures. Enid's final years were marked by pain, yet she resolutely refused medication, fearing a return to morphine addiction. She remained true to the motto that had guided her through a life filled with both grandeur and scandal. Never be ill, never be afraid, and never be jealous. In 1973, at the age of 81, Enid Maud Lindeman died as she had lived, defiant, unbroken, and unforgettable. Enid Maud Lindeman lived a life that teetered on the edge of legend and scandal, a mesmerizing dance between privilege and peril. She was the woman who broke hearts and broke rules, whose laughter rang out in the grandest salons, and whose name was whispered behind velvet curtains. She loved deeply, fiercely, but lost just as profoundly. 4 husbands taken by fate's hand, yet always with a question mark lingering in the air. Her life was one of ceaseless reinvention. The young Australian girl who became a countess, the lover of millionaires and war heroes, the eccentric collector of wild animals, and the mistress of secrets too dark to fully comprehend. She faced life's blows with unyielding grace: war, scandal, public shaming, and the pain of addiction, both her own and those of the men who loved her. Her strength was a paradox, forged by deep sorrows and gilded pleasures. But beneath her bravado, there was a woman still capable of hurt, still vulnerable to the barbs of those who never understood her restless soul. And yet, her enduring defiance was her truest victory. She outlived her scandals, embraced her eccentricities, and found peace not in conquest, but in the simple joy of art, animals, and the loyalty of her children. Even as her body succumbed to age, her spirit remained untamed, a reminder that life's greatest stories are written not just in love and glory, but in the courage to rise, again and again, from the ashes of scandal, loss, and whispered judgment. In the end, she left this world as she had entered it, boldly, brilliantly, and without a trace of regret. I hope you enjoyed this week's deep dive into the life of Enid Lindeman. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think she was a victim of her times or the author of her own misfortune? Let's chat in the comments below. As a small channel dedicated to celebrating remarkable women throughout history, your support is invaluable. Every like, comment, share, and subscription helps us keep uncovering the untold stories of these extraordinary lives. If you're enjoying our content, please consider subscribing, becoming a Patreon member, or joining as a channel member. Each bit of support truly makes a difference. For those of you who've made it this far in the video, thank you. We now have over 50 biographies of incredible women on the channel, so be sure to explore their stories as well. There are so many more inspiring lives to share, and we can't wait to bring them all to you. A special shout out to our amazing patrons: Velocity Girl, ZenLife68, Jillian Barker, Junie Moon, Philip Gallegos, Kingsley Clark, Kapham Chung, Harry Thurston, Karen Craig, Second Soprano 150, Michelle Lynn Neal, and Deborah Himes. Your support keeps this channel going, and I'm so grateful to have you on this journey with us. And to everyone who just watched, stay safe, keep exploring history, and as always, thank you for watching.